Modern physics asserts that gravity is not actually a force. Spacetime is distorted near massive objects, and it is this distortion that leads us to observe the manifestation of gravity. What is this special behavior of spacetime, and why do objects end up falling into these depressions? Although, let me say again, the word falling is not quite correct. And these examples that we often see in various popular science sources are misleading. In other words, we can rephrase the question: we know about the distortion of spacetime. We know that gravity is the distortion of spacetime. But what actually makes objects fall into these distortions? If we want a ball to roll, we need to kick it with our foot. If we want a stone to fly somewhere, we need to throw that stone. If we want, say, someone to move over on the bus, we push them aside. All these situations are always connected to direct interaction. What is direct interaction? Well, it's the direct transfer of force from one object to another. And it's not hard to guess that as physics developed, these kinds of views about gravity appeared first. At first, gravity was perceived as a direct interaction between two bodies, although perhaps it would be more accurate to say that initially, gravity was simply seen as a certain fact. In fact, that's how it was perceived even before Newton's time. So what did Newton actually do? He derived a law that describes the behavior of this strange phenomenon. But no one could understand why it works this way. And when Einstein said that gravity is a distortion of space-time, by the way, there is a huge amount of other work supporting this idea. We shouldn't think that Einstein just made all this up out of thin air. So this is where things got really interesting. Of course, we wanted to imagine that if this distortion of space-time exists, then something must still be moving our body. But what could possibly move our body if there is no force acting upon it? That is, there is no direct interaction, in the sense that, for example, when we kick a ball, it flies off. So in gravity, there should also be something that kicks it and makes it move. That's why we tried to explain it using that very rubber sheet where objects roll down. But neither explanation is correct, and gravity is not a force. The very idea that gravity is not a force means that no one kicked the ball to make it fly. So what happened then? Why did the ball fly? It flew on its own. That's the secret. That's the fundamental meaning of this understanding. And this material, this video, is aimed at those who already know that gravity is a property of space-time related to its distortion. But who still don't understand why in fact objects move there anyway, if they're not rolling down a hill, if no one is pushing them. In order to understand how all this works, we need to delve deeper into the phenomenon of space-time. When Newton considered gravity, he viewed it as it is, just like software is often described as is. And so, in fact, Newton viewed gravity in this way. He considered it only in terms of space. What is the fundamental difference from what we have now? It's that back then, space was simply space, and time was simply time. Moreover, time was perceived in many different ways. But at that time, no one assumed that space and time were connected. Since Einstein's era, and even before him, people began to realize that there is some invisible connection between space and time. And so, in order to understand what actually happens to a body that is subjected to gravity, what happens to an object that finds itself in a certain gravitational field, let's call it that, we need to understand the existence of this connection and what it means. In a certain sense, it's easier to approach the understanding of this problem from the perspective of the photon, because the photon is a very strange particle that in many ways is not subject to certain things, but most importantly it moves at the speed of light. This is to some extent a key parameter both for what we are going to discuss next and for what we are discussing now. It is precisely the speed of light that serves as our starting point. The speed of light is a certain value, a stable constant, which in fact defines space and time as another interconnected system. Both space and time are interconnected with each other through the speed of light. This is something that is very difficult for us to understand. It's very hard to imagine because we, in fact, perceive everything as a given. We perceive our surroundings as, well, as a certain system, a certain picture that is always connected to what we are used to touching, what we are used to experiencing ourselves, what we are used to understanding from the examples around us. But here, the connection is traced, firstly, mathematically, and secondly, from what we have already been able to observe in laboratories and through various measurements. So it turns out that space and time are a certain interconnected system, which are linked to each other through the speed of light. And what does that mean? It means that any movement in space corresponds to a certain movement in time. And it also means that a certain movement in time corresponds to a certain movement in space. This too is an absolutely integral thing. So how do we calculate all of this? How can we understand how much space is contained in time or how much time is contained in space? This is where the speed of light comes to the rescue, as it connects these quantities. And to a large extent it was Einstein's achievement that he applied this knowledge precisely to describe the behavior of space-time. And in many ways, this defines what we are talking about now. When Newton defined gravity, it was a system consisting only of space and only of time. When Einstein spoke about gravity, it became something connected to spacetime, and spacetime, the spacetime continuum, is a complex system in which space and time are interconnected. I hope this idea has firmly settled in your mind because we will be relying on it further. And by the way, this is not even a postulate. To some extent, it is a mathematical fact that is finding more and more confirmation in practice. We have a massive object. This massive object exists within the spacetime continuum. The spacetime continuum consists of space and time. We understand that, according to current concepts, spacetime has a certain structure that can be visualized using a grid. When a massive object appears in this spacetime grid, it causes the lines, which serve as the notional guides of spacetime, to change their geometry. This is precisely the phenomenon we observe when we see a massive object bending spacetime. In general, it would be logical to say that when we have a ball lying on a rubber sheet, that's a poor example, because ideally we should be drawing something three-dimensional. And those examples where a grid is drawn showing the distortion of spacetime in 3 dimensions are much more illustrative. But even there are still some problems, and it still doesn't fully answer the question. So let's return to our main line of thought. When we talk about the presence of a massive object in this spacetime, depicted as a grid of these so-called geodesic lines, we say that it has been distorted. If another massive object is placed nearby, say with less mass, it ends up within the area affected by this distortion. This distortion is often called a gravitational field. If another massive object finds itself within this distortion, it starts moving in the direction toward which everything has been distorted. Now, here's the most interesting part. But why in fact does it move? The word movement. Why wouldn't the object just stay in place? No one is pushing it. That is, there is no direct interaction, no force. Gravity is not a force, and it can't go down, because there is no such thing as down, because down is gravity itself. This is exactly where we need to recall everything we've just said about the connection between space and time. There is a certain basic axiom, which is neither a postulate nor anything else, but is another inherent property of spacetime. Any object in space is constantly moving. If an object is at rest, it is only at rest relative to something else. You will probably ask, how is that possible? Why does it work this way? Well, to begin with, we can look at deeper levels and see that there is no such thing as stasis in nature at all, that nothing can ever truly be still. If we look, for example, at the behavior of atoms inside some material, they are constantly moving. They move even at absolute zero. There are minimal pulsations that make this possible. If we look at quantum foam, there is always something happening there. Constant bursts of energy, movements, exchanges of particles, and much more. Even if we look at the 0 point, there are a great many descriptions suggesting that the 0 point is a point of zero energy, a point of some sort of equilibrium, but even it, little by little, still fluctuates. There are even many interesting studies that suggest it is possible to extract energy, thermal energy, from the 0 point. But that's a slightly different topic, a slightly different plane of discussion. However, what's important is something else, that all objects in space and time are constantly in motion. All other aspects related to immobility, to the idea that something is static, are connected to our perception. Let me say again that our perception often gets in the way and often confuses everything in our minds that can possibly be confused. Alright, now let's take this very incomprehensible motion and move it to the level of space-time. Apparently it turns out that when an object moves, it travels through space. Is that so? Yes, that's right. But since space and time are interconnected, any moving object will always also move through time. The exact opposite situation. If an object moves through time, it will also move through space. That's the connection. And here again, the speed of light is important for us, in order to roughly understand where and how much percentage has gone. To figure out this strange kind of movement, you actually need to take the speed of light and calculate it from there. This is another point that might clarify something for you. And now comes a very interesting story. We said that a stationary object will still be stationary only in one frame of reference associated with a specific observer, and that this object is still moving. And here's another interesting point. An object is always moving through time as well. I mentioned this for a reason. Most likely, the next thought comes to your mind. Alright, space and time are connected. Fine. An object moves only through time, but not through space. Or let's say an object moves only through space, but not through time. Accordingly, in this way, we can bring everything to some common denominator. All this mess leads us to the conclusion that yes, an object can move only along one of the axes in this complex system. But something else is important. What matters is that time is always moving. If an object is stationary in space, it still moves through time. But is it possible to stop time? By and large, within the current theory, we don't have a direct answer to this question. However, we always imply that the passage of time happens like a sequence of changing images. And again, from the main theory we're discussing now, from which our understanding of gravity follows, it also follows that time itself. There is a certain existing set of frames that simply replace one another in sequence. This fits quite well with the idea we're discussing. And so what we perceive as time is influenced firstly by entropy and secondly by our perception. We are unable to comprehend infinity, and we cannot understand how time changes. In the same way, we cannot imagine the absence of time. But in many theories, including the theory of relativity, time is a kind of conventional quantity that simply exists. And again, according to this logic, all the frames on this timeline already exist. We are simply observing their succession. And here we arrive at an interesting idea, which in fact I was trying to lead you to, and I hope I have more or less succeeded. An object is always moving because time is passing. But why are these things connected? Because, as we discussed with you 5 minutes ago, space and time are always interconnected. And immobility in one dimension will not allow you to remain immobile in another dimension. That's why even an apparently motionless object, which might seem mechanically at rest if we disregard all our knowledge, if we set aside all these oscillations, the movement of planets in space, and absolutely everything else, if we disregard all of that, there will still always be motion. This motion will result, firstly, from the nature of the object itself, and secondly, from the fact that time is passing. As long as time moves forward, the object is in motion. Now let's return to our discussion of spacetime distortions. We mentioned that spacetime can be described, in a certain sense, by this coordinate grid. And basically, objects that move through space travel along this coordinate grid, following these imaginary lines. What are these imaginary lines? Well, it's a kind of mathematical crutch that allows us to determine the behavior of an object in space. Let's try to think of it this way. And so, as we said, an object is always moving there. Now here's a very interesting point. When we have a massive body within this system, it distorts those very geodesic lines. And accordingly, we can think that the object will move along these geodesic lines, which have been distorted. But it gets even more interesting. Why is it worth talking about this? Because this is where resonance arises. We assume that if an object was moving along a certain geodesic line, and then a distortion occurred nearby, and another object was moving close by, it would start orbiting this object. But by this logic, nothing would ever fall to Earth.